Good afternoon. My name is Jean-Christophe Bas. I will be moderating this session. I'm the CEO of the Global Compass, which is an organization that is working on the private and corporate sector engagement in promoting intercultural understanding and cooperation. Welcome to this last session before the wrap-up, a session that is entitled Civilization and Secularism. I was actually wondering if it was in purpose that it was called Civilization and Secularism and not Civilizations and Religion, because there is one session on civilization and secularism, but no session on religion. But maybe this is something that can be addressed by the panelists. I think it's an interesting nuance, and I think it's common to say that during the Cold War, for most people around the planet, the defining factor was, in a way, ideology. And since the collapse of the Berlin Wall and the rise of this whole discussion about the clash of civilization, the defining factor is no longer ideology, but identity. And as part of identity, of course, we have culture, we have values, we have language, but we also have religion. And I think there was an interesting study a few years ago by the Heidelberg Institute for International Conflict that was listing the most severe conflict around the world, and I think they listed about 140 serious conflict around the world, and saying that about 110, so 110 out of 140 of those serious conflict around the world that were either deeply or partially rooted on culture. And that was also a new phenomenon, a post-Cold War phenomenon. There were less conflict between countries, but more and more conflict within countries, and that were indeed deeply or partially rooted on culture, and therefore also, because religion is part of culture, on the role of religion. I think it's also interesting to mention that when we talk about religion, we are also talking about, well, usually talking about religious difference, but here we are talking indeed about a perception or the role, and I think this is what will be discussed by the panel, on the vision of secularism, saying that religion has nothing to do with policy, nothing to do with the public sphere, and in a way has to be clearly differentiated. And this will be, and I don't want to go way beyond my role as a moderator, but just to say that we can consider that there are two dividing lines in most societies today. One that could be the vertical divide, that is, and this is very much what was discussed in the previous session, between the localist and at the other spectrum, the side of the spectrum, the globalist, or those who, in a way that could be summarized, the anywhere versus the somewhere. And that is, in a way, an illustration about that is, how in the same country or the same society, for instance, in the UK, just a few weeks before the Brexit, which was an illustration of the, let's say, the somewhere, the people in London voted for a mayor who was Mr. Sadiq Khan from a Muslim and Pakistanese origin. So that was the illustration of the, let's say, the somewhere. And then the other dividing line is, in a way, between those who have a very strong commitment or feeling to protect and to promote the secularism and saying that religion has nothing to do, indeed, with the public sphere. And at the other spectrum, those who say that we as individuals have nothing else to do, are nothing but the expression of a spiritual and religious belonging that must dictate or influence our behavior and public policy behaviors. So, and again, I mean, if we want to take an example, we have on the the extreme secular side, you know, those who are the promoter of the absolute freedom of speech, and those who are, in a way, you know, what was the Je suis Charlie. And then you have at the other side, you know, those who say, we agree with religion of speech, as long as it doesn't interfere or it doesn't blaspheme the prophets of the religious figures. And those are, I mean, those four tribes, you know, that divide the vertical and the horizontal, in a way, tribes that are increasingly polarized and increasingly going in opposite direction, and that are having more and more time, in a way, to find the possibility to live together. I don't know, sorry to be too long, but I wanted just to, in a way, to give those few elements to open the discussion on this last panel. And it is my pleasure to announce and to give the floor to Dr. Kratochvil from the Institute of International Relations in Prague, who will present his paper on religion as a weapon. So this is a very provocative and intriguing title. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Allow me first to thank the organizers, Dialogue of Civilizations Research Institute, as well as Jeff for the kind invitation. My paper also is related to the overall background of my paper is also related to the topic of our workshop today, connected to how civilizations are defined and what role religion plays in this definition. But the starting point of my paper is a bit more specific, and it's the following paradox. Because what I argue in the introduction of the paper is that the advocates of Western secularism have for a long time attempted to what I call culturalize religion, to interpret religion as part of folklore, part of our cultural heritage. If you look, for instance, as I did in my previous research on the European Union, who is the main driving force of this interpretation of religion, then you will always encounter religion in the official text under the heading of culture. So it's culture, and then there are some paragraphs, and one of them is about religion. So basically, religion and folk costumes are made of the same stuff, would be the argument. Now, this strategy, of course, has aimed at neutralizing religion, at making it harmless, at making it non-political. And the strategy, surprisingly, was quite successful. Religious actors originally resisted this strategy, but then, and that's the paradox, they accepted the result of this struggle. So we have a culturalized religion in Europe, at least. But they turned it into a weapon, and that's the title of my article. Because by reducing religion to culture, that also means that religion becomes the most visible expression of the culture. So if there is an real or alleged attack on religion, you can very easily claim that it is an attack on our culture. So the connection goes both ways, from religion to culture, from culture to religion. And the result can be rather surprising then, because even in highly secularized societies, like most societies in Western, Central, and also to some extent Eastern Europe, religion then can be successfully invoked in political struggles. And I argue that only two conditions are necessary for this strategy to be successful. The first condition is that there is what is called a policy entrepreneur in political science, a political entrepreneur, some influential public figure who raises the issue in the media and the public sphere. And the second condition is that there is a strong condition between this religious issue and or perceived link between this religious issue and culture. So if these two conditions are fulfilled, then even non-religious audiences react to this religious argument. So in this process, and that's the next thing I argue, religion can become an empty signifier. The religious symbols or the religious practices, religious discourses do have an impact on the audience, even if the audience is not religious in terms of their behavior or their beliefs. It does not change the secularizing tendency, but it changes the political behavior of the audience. And I'll try to show this argument, this theoretical argument, with 3 empirical examples from the Czech Republic. The Czech Republic is, as I'm sure you all know, one of the most secular countries in the world. Some polls even argue that it is the most secular country in the world. Around 80% of the population consider themselves non-religious. Only 10% belong to the largest religious group, that is the Roman Catholic Church, and about 3%, only 3% attend any religious services on a regular basis. So it's highly secular. So in methodological terms, this is the least likely case for a religious argument to be successful. The 3 cases I explored in my paper, I'll start with the first one, the law on Good Friday. So that was an idea that floated around for the last 30 years, I would say, in the country, that Good Friday should be made a national holiday. It was an idea proposed by the Christian conservatives. For 14 times they made this proposal in the parliament, and routinely it was in the past rejected by the political left as an imposition of a religious holiday on the secular population. So it was always rejected, but then in October 2015 something changed, and suddenly it was enthusiastically accepted and supported by almost everyone in the parliament. So what happened? What changed? And my argument is that the holiday was recast in terms of identity, not as a religious festivity, but as part of the traditional Czech culture. So Good Friday is not a religious holiday, it's a cultural tradition. The official explanatory memorandum that has to accompany every draft law states, and I will quote, "It is essential to take into account the current international situation and protect our identity against the onslaught of other identities which assert themselves in barbaric and uncivilized ways." Of course, without pointing to Islam, but everybody knows who we talk about. So once reframed in this way, the left suddenly stopped opposing the law. Even the Social Democratic Prime Minister enthusiastically supported the law, and a broad coalition emerged of religious conservatives, the Catholic Church, anti-immigration left, and the new right-wing populists as well. Now, again, I want to stress that it does not mean that the population suddenly became religious. There was a recent opinion poll that shows that more than half of the population does not consider Easter a religious holiday. You know, a fun fact, 10% of university-educated respondents even believe that Jesus Christ was born on Good Friday. So it really shows the level of ignorance among the public about Easter. But still, you know, a religious holiday supported by religious authorities, but cast in cultural terms and adopted as a national holiday in the most secular country in the world. So that's case number 1. Case number 2 is the so-called Lidl scandal, which also was present in some other European countries, in Belgium to some extent, as far as I know. And this second case revolves around a German, that's important, German, especially here in Berlin, German retail chain, which is present in the Czech Republic as well. And in their promotional materials, they make promotion of their themed weeks focused on different national cuisines. So there is an Italian, French week. They even have a British week there. Yeah, I don't know what they sell there, but there is a British week as well, American, and yeah, fish and chips. But then in September 2017, they had their Greek week. And on the leaflets and on the packaging of the products, they use these stereotypical whitewashed Greek churches against the blue sea on Santorini, I think. But what some consumers soon noted, the crosses were erased from the material. So it's the churches without the crosses there. And some other consumers also soon noted that a week before, when it was an Oriental week, a tiny crescent remained on a mosque there. So you can understand, crosses removed, crescents remained. We all know what it is about. That was the argument. And it was a huge public uproar. The debate raged on for weeks. Marketing experts were shocked because, as I said, Czechs never care about crosses in any context. Of course, there are no crosses in classrooms. Crosses are almost nowhere. But suddenly it became such an important, sensitive issue of national culture again. The Archbishop of Prague, the highest-ranking Catholic representative of the Catholic Church in the country, sent a public letter to the Greek ambassador, arguing that what little the company did was, quote, an attack on the cultural heritage of the entire human civilization and a barbaric act. So of course it is clearly overblown, but please notice that it is again cultural, not religious language that is used there. Then it was followed by the Minister of Agriculture, who called for a boycott of the company. And as I say, this whole narrative was extremely successful. And what I argue is that it was not about Lidl. It was only a convenient discursive trigger because it contained all the elements you need in the populist narrative. The connection to Germany, which of course means the connection to Angela Merkel and welcoming refugees. Then you had the crescent, the missing crosses, and the attack on our culture. I just want, again, a fun fact there, some 2 months later, Lidl announced its profits, and the profits increased substantially in the same period. It became one of the top 5 retail chains in the country, and it also got the title Business of the Year in the same year. So obviously there is no connection between the behavior in terms of consumerist behavior of the people and the widespread critique of the practice. So in the end, what it ended up with was that it is an implicitly Muslim attack on Christianity, but also an attack on the very foundation, cultural foundations of the Western civilization. And the final case I want to mention is the case of Christian refugees. Because, as in many other countries, the debate about refugees became the fulcrum of a number of political campaigns in the country. The results of the elections very often even hinged on the attitudes of the parties towards refugees. The securitization of migration has been extremely successful. Czechs, all the opinion polls show that Czechs perceive refugees as the greatest threat together with terrorism and organized crime, which are seen as interconnected, as the greatest threat to their national security. At this moment, I should probably say that in the last year, the Czech Republic accepted 12 refugees, not 12,000, but 12 refugees. But in spite of that, this is the big issue. Now, of course, it has had a religious side to it again. Unlike Pope Francis, the country's senior clergymen repeatedly expressed their negative attitude of migration. But of course, a total rejection of refugees would probably still not be possible. So instead, what the Catholic bishops did was they started requesting that the refugees who are accepted are Christians, and very publicly so. And again, the argument was not phrased in religious terms, but in cultural terms, because Christians share our culture, was the idea, even if they are from Syria or Iraq, unlike the Muslim refugees. The Archbishop of Moravia, the second highest bishop in the country, claimed that the limitless acceptance of the people from other cultures would mean the end of our current culture. So again, it's about culture. Now, the result was that the population, the Czech population today, is more inimical to accepting Muslim refugees than in any other country in the vicinity, even compared with countries that are more religious, like Poland. There are polls that compare the 2 or 3 countries with Slovakia, Hungary. All of them are more religious, substantially more religious than the Czech Republic, but their openness towards Muslim refugees is higher than with Czechs, who should not really care because they are not as religious as Poles, but that's the way it is. Now, and the final shift in this case, which really shows how deep this paradox is that then suddenly nobody expected that, but 92 Chinese Christian, persecuted Christians asked for asylum in the Czech Republic. But what happened, because this Christianity as it is publicly understood is basically synonymous with our culture, so the Chinese were not only denied, they were rejected. Only 8 got the asylum, all the rest were rejected. But they also were basically denied their status of Christians, because in the narrative that became dominant, Christian means our culture, and clearly Chinese cannot be our culture, they are Chinese. So the result was that in the end, this reduction from all refugees to Christian refugees led to no refugees, and the church played a key role there. So my conclusion, I think that we can generalize this argument on 2 levels. The first level is that what I talk about is not some idiosyncratic feature of the Czech Republic. I believe that we would find very similar cases all across the region, from the German AfD to Austria, to Poland, to Hungary. Russia would be a very nice example of that, the emerging alliance of the Orthodox Church and the Kremlin, which is in no country of the region accompanied by any increase in religiosity. And that, I think, is extremely important, because this trend is often interpreted as a religious resurgence. But statistical, coming to data, in the end, I also believe in facts. Statistical data do not confirm any increase in religious practices in any of those countries. So it's not a religious resurgence, certainly not in the Czech Republic. And then there is, so what it, again, I want to conclude by saying that what it changes is voting behavior and exclusionary political action, but not the levels of religiosity. And then there is the second level of generalization, and what I think we are witnessing here is an attempt at a fundamental redefinition of the difference between civilization and barbarism, because the distinction in the form that has been dominant until now was the difference between the secular West and the unfortunately still religious East and South. But instead, what we now have is that the collective self is now recast not as secular, but as cultural, whereby this cultural includes both elements of patriarchal secularism. We have to protect our women from the rapists, but also culturalized religion. We have to protect our culture/religion. So this, my last paragraph, this is the real post-secular era we are now entering. So what I want to argue is that Habermas and others who believe that post-secularism would be an era of openness and plurality were overly optimistic. What we really see is the emergence of emerging alliance between secular populists who start to use religious language and religious conservatives who culturalize their language. And the resulting religious cultural discourse has already established itself as the new language of exclusion and the new language of resistance to liberalism. But, and that's the open question, it may even develop into the new paradigm of the self-constitution of Western civilization. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kratochvil, for this very rich paper, actually, that would deserve almost a whole day discussion, and with lots of, in a way, irony between, indeed, this huge controversy about religion, but as you have demonstrated, that it doesn't translate into an increase of religious practice. So there is lots of things that, in a way, need to be clarified. And actually, there's also eventually one topic for future research for Doc here is also how much, and I don't think it has been stressed at some point, that this whole debate on the clash of civilization has popped up exactly at the same time where social media has started really existing around the world. And I think that it would be interesting at some point to look at the, let's say, the extreme role of social media that is always kind of demultiplying controversy and how much it has impacted the extreme feeling or expression of the public dismay or the public discourse due to social media that are, in a way, not very well equipped, to moderate discussion, but at the opposite are, in a way, fueling the frustration or the fury. So I think this is an interesting correlation between the development of those, the whole discussion on the clash of civilization and the development of all social media.